One of the greatest children's books ever written and widely read was just about stating an obvious truth. Everybody poops. Just like that, right? Let's just normalize this activity so that you know that it's just part of life. As a pastor, I feel like maybe I should write one called Everybody Sins. Because they do. But I don't know that I would want to normalize it, to make it seem like it's just natural or it's the way things should be, because it's not, even though it is true that everyone sins. In fact, it's right here in this book. The word's already been written in the Bible. It says in Romans chapter 3, verse 23, all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. All have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. You know, the truth is we don't live very long in this life before we begin to assert our own will. We don't live very long in this world before we begin to assert our own independence and our own sovereignty over our decision-making, over our lives, and over the world around us. That's because sin is an endemic condition in the heart of man that came in right at the very beginning. Do you remember how we all started out this whole crazy adventure called the world? You and I, we began as farmers. We were farmers. And we were tenant farmers. We were given a plot of land by the owner of the farm and given free rein to grow all that we could and to keep everything that we needed to sustain us. Given everything that we needed to thrive in our work on this farm. We began as farmers, but we quickly became rebels. We decided that simply being given the gift of living on the land, of farming the land, of keeping all that the land gave us, we thought, we would like the deed to this land. We decided that somehow, for some reason, that the landowner was not trustworthy, even though he had never done anything to demonstrate that. And so we became rebels. And when our rebellion failed, we became fugitives. How about that? From farmer to rebel to fugitive, running and hiding from the landowner. That's the story of humanity. That's how it began and how we got to the place that we're in today. Satan did a number on us in the garden all those years ago by convincing us to enter into that original sin. But if you ask me, that was not his most fantastic accomplishment. That one came later, even though he sowed the seeds of it right there in the beginning. It wasn't enough for the enemy to cause us to sin. He then wanted to convince us that it really wasn't that big a deal. And if we would buy that, how about this? There's no such thing as sin anyway. That's really been his most fantastic trick that he has played on us through the course of human history. But you can see he sowed the seeds of it right there at the very beginning when he came to Adam and Eve. And he said, I can't believe God said you can't eat from any of the trees in this garden. You see what he did? He took God's word and he just slightly altered it to begin to sow in a lie so that the farmers would become rebels. And they responded, no, look, we can, just not this one tree, because if we do, we'll surely die. You won't surely die. You don't know that. How can you know that? You should find out for yourself. You don't need to trust God and his word. Just figure it out for yourself. You're smart enough. You've got the wisdom you need. Just go for it. On your own, go for it. And right there it is, the beginning of the end for us. Not just that we sinned, but then in our sin, we welcome the devil's lie that there is no such thing, because what we decide to do is right is in fact right. Now we live in a world that frankly confuses sin and virtue. The lines have been completely blurred on which is which and which has value and importance in our lives. Consider what has historically been known as the 7 deadly sins, the subject of our next 7 weeks of worship together. There's pride, the one that we'll explore today. This is the first on every list of everybody's 7 deadly sins. It is always the first because it is the birth sin for all the rest. But if you think about pride in today's world, there is virtue in it by the way the world looks at things. Pride today says, hey, you've made it on your own. You are self-made. That's a virtue in today's world, that you did everything on your own. That's considered virtuous today. Or how about the second deadly sin, anger? Anger is a feeling that we get when we feel our boundaries are being violated. But today, we're told that if your boundaries are being violated, it's because you're right and everybody else is wrong. That's a good feeling, that your opinion matters more than anyone else's, and you need to make sure that they know it. Good for you. Man, you really told them off. That was excellent, right? There's virtue in that display of our anger today. Or how about sloth? That's a deadly sin, and yet the world today can see virtue in it. It comes out a little bit more subtly, but consider the environment of extreme entitlement in which we live today. I deserve everything, no matter what I have or have not done. So I should be able to just sit here and let the world come to me. You can see it slithering its way in. Goes forward and on. What about gluttony? The idea that what I want is what I need. That's what gluttony is. It's confusing the ideas of need and want. And today's society, with one swipe, anything you want is what you need, and it's at your house within 2 days or less. And if not, you exert your anger because you deserve to have it right now. There's lust, which today has been held up as a virtue. The idea that pleasure, what feels good, is what I deserve. What feels good in the moment is what I need. And so if it feels good, I should do it no matter what the cost is to myself or to anyone else, because it is a high value. Treat yourself, right? Tom Haverford fans, anybody? Parks and Rec? Treat yourself. This was a whole philosophy and way of life that gets lifted up. And then, of course, there are the unholy siblings, these brothers of envy and greed, which it doesn't even matter that they stand in direct opposition, that they're contradictory, but we buy both lies that come from the world. Envy says, you don't deserve to have something that I don't. Greed says, I deserve what I have, whether you have it or not. And we buy both of those concepts and ideas and lift them both up as virtues. You see what I mean? We live in a world that increasingly confuses sin and virtue. And it's problematic for us because it sticks us, it mires us in our sin. And what's worse, it pushes us to a place we would never want to go. You know, there's a difference between being a criminal and being a traitor. A criminal violates the laws of the nation. A traitor betrays the nation itself. Sin does not make us criminals. Sin is not what it is. Its destructive power isn't because we violate a set of ethics from God. It's treason because we betray our very identity. When we sin, we betray who God created us to be. And so over the next few weeks, we're going to draw some lines that are intended to be instructive and helpful, that point out the sin that so easily entangles us and the virtue that extinguishes it. Now, here's the problem with sin. It's enticing. I don't know if there are any other pyromaniacs in the room, but I like to watch a fire burn. I just do. I like the way it dances and wiggles, the way it looks like it might go out only to flame back up, the way that it catches the wind, and the way that it just hypnotizes you as you watch it, the colors and the flicker and the constant changing of shape. I don't know a better metaphor for how sin just seduces us than the flicker of the flame. Now, I'll mention I was going to light all of these, and it was going to be a beautiful fire, but when I attempted it, I was really afraid that the fire alarm was going to go off. So just imagine it kind of roaring like this, if you don't mind. And if the fire alarm does go off, just hang on. I've instructed the staff to call the fire department and turn it off. I know. It smokes a lot more than I thought, y'all. This is pride, though, friends. This flickering flame is the sin of pride. It is so unbelievably seductive. Pride has been called a spiritual cancer, and it is. If you get it infecting your spirit just a little, it turns malignant and it spreads through every corner of your soul. You have to extinguish it. You have to cut it out of your body, lest it kill your soul. It is a spiritual cancer, and it can affect even the best among us. Vince Lombardi was the coach of the Green Bay Packers, and he had a legendary ego, legendary sense of pride. He certainly was so incredibly successful that maybe he earned that sense, but it had grown disproportionately large to his accomplishments, so much so that there's a story that one time Vince played in a game that he wasn't supposed to win, and his wife wasn't able to make it to the game, and he was pretty frustrated with her that she did not come. And then he did deliver the victory. They won the game, and by the time he got home that night, she was already asleep in bed, and so he slid into bed next to her, and when he did, his feet touched her, and she said, "God, your feet are cold." And he says, "It's okay, honey, in bed you can just call me Vince." Yeah? How about that? That is the sin of pride. The idea that you become God yourself. And it's not new. And it's something that people even choose for themselves. In Paradise Lost, Milton wrote that the devil said, "I would rather reign in hell than serve in heaven," which seems odd to us unless we examine the fact that there are plenty of people who choose the same for themselves today. I would rather reign on earth. I would rather have wealth and fame and fortune on earth than to serve in heaven, even if the cost of all that I do for myself is that I do not ever experience heaven. I would rather that now than serve in heaven forever. It's not just the devil, but it is us as well who make the same choice. It comes from this itch for recognition. It comes from the desire to be the center of the universe, to put I in the middle of everything. And it comes out in ways that are obvious and sometimes even in ways that are not so. Has anybody ever said to you, "Hey, have I showed you these pictures of my grandkids?" and you thought, "No, and I really appreciate it"? Yeah? Or talking to someone who says, "You're never going to believe what happened to me. I was caught in the middle of a storm." And before you can even finish telling the story, they're already telling you about their storm experience and how they managed it. It shows up in these little subtle ways too. Not just in the big ways, but in the subtle ways in our lives, where we become the very center of our own universe. And this is the problem. It doesn't just make us into rude people. It doesn't just fracture some sense of decorum. It can fracture entire relationships. If you only ever put yourself first, and you are the most important person in the universe, there's really not a lot of room for anybody else. You have no desire or drive to give yourself to anyone else. It manifests not only interpersonally, but even in society. Where do you think racism and discrimination come from? It's the idea that my group is more valuable and worthwhile than yours. That my group is entitled to special position and privilege that yours is not. Why? Because I am in it. But even more destructive, the problem with pride is that it is self-worship. If you want to know the heart of it, what kills the soul, what makes pride deadly to the soul, is that pride is self-worship. By definition, it bars us from receiving salvation. If you are prideful, you cannot confess, and you will not repent, because you are your own highest power, and you worship yourself. Jesus was in the temple courts in Luke chapter 18. And in verse 9, we begin reading, "To some who were confident of their own righteousness and looked down at everyone else, Jesus told this parable. 2 men went up to the temple to pray, one a Pharisee and the other a tax collector. The Pharisee stood by himself and prayed, 'God, I thank you that I am not like other people, robbers, evildoers, adulterers, even like that tax collector. I fast twice a week and I give 1/10 of all I get.' But the tax collector stood at a distance, and he would not even look up to heaven, but beat his breast and said, 'God, have mercy on me, a sinner.' I tell you that this man, rather than the other, went home justified before God. For all those who exalt themselves will be humbled, and those who humble themselves will be exalted." You see, friends, pride says you get what you deserve. And God helps those who help themselves. But salvation is a gift freely given. You cannot earn it. You do not deserve it. The only way you can receive it is as a gift from God. And so if you think you only get what you deserve, you can never be saved. In Ephesians chapter 2, verse 8, it says, "We are saved by grace through faith." And this is God's gift, that no one can earn it. And so where pride says you get what you deserve, humility says you get what you don't deserve. Where pride says God helps those who help themselves, humility says God helps those who cannot help themselves. God helps the helpless. That's us. That is the race of Adam and Eve, the fugitives who are still fleeing from the God who loves them. And this is why pride is so destructive. It's destructive because it bars us from opening ourselves to the gift of grace that has come through the salvation of Jesus Christ. Some people try to project this humility, but they do it from a place of pride, and it doesn't do you any good. Humility as a virtue will cancel the power of pride in our lives, but not if it's inauthentic. You know, pride, when it exerts itself as pretend humility, always exerts itself to a place of self-deprecation, of presumed weakness. It comes out of people's mouths in ways that, if I point it out to you, will register. It comes out when people say something to you that they shouldn't have, and they come to you and they say, "Hey, I really want to apologize. I know what I said hurt you. I am so sorry that you're so fragile that you can't hear the truth. That was so insensitive of me." Right? It comes out of people who are seemingly apologetic for the things they have in their life. "You know, I am just so blessed. It's nothing that I have done. It's just that God has blessed me more than you. It's not me, it's Him. He just thinks I'm better than you in every single way. What can you do?" This is the way that pride masquerading as humility comes out of us, comes out of people. Believe it or not, it even happens in the church. I see it most often there when people come to my office and there's something that they would like changed about the church. And it begins with, "I have an idea," or "I have a question." And when it becomes obvious, what they're asking for is not going to happen, because in the end, it's probably not in the best interest of the body. inevitably they start to say things like this. Well, you know, I've given a lot to this church through the years. I've served on every committee. We've been very generous. Now, I'll tell you a secret that I've discovered after 20 years. There are people in the church who work more than I do for it and give more than I do to it, but I have never once had one of those people say anything like that to me, right? Why? Because people who serve and give to the church do so from a posture of humility, not one of pride that says, I want to control what happens next. That's just pride masquerading as humility, and it's empty. The truth is, humility is not weak. Humility is not self-deprecating. Humility is, in fact, on the very other end of that spectrum. Humility tells us that we are worth something and that we are important. If pride says, I am important and matter to the world, humility says, I am important and matter to God. Do you see the distinction? When we know that we are important to the creator of the universe, that we matter to him, that he is mindful of us, it is not a position of weakness we find ourselves in, but one of absolute strength. Our identity is sealed in the one who loves us and cares for us. The psalmist writes this in Psalm chapter 8. When I consider your heavens, the work of your fingers, and the moon and the stars which you've set in place, what is mankind that you are mindful of them? Human beings that you care for them. You have made them a little lower than the angels and crowned them with glory and honor. You have made them rulers over the works of your hands. You put everything under their feet. Humility reminds us that we are farmers in the field of our God. That we are his. And that because we matter to him, we matter. Because we are important to him, we are important, regardless of what our experience in the world is. Jesus finished that passage in Luke with a warning. He says, you can exalt yourself in this life. Lord, I thank you that I'm so great and I do so much and I'm not like that sinner over there. You can do that, he says. And if you exalt yourself, you will be humbled. Or you can humble yourself, he says, and I will exalt you. Now, I don't know if you have ever tripped and fallen, but my experience is tripping and falling hurts more than choosing to get down on the ground. When I choose to get down on the ground, I control the pace of the bend of my knee, and I arrange for a soft landing. When I trip and fall, I'm likely to crack a tooth. Here's my call for you. Sin is seductive. It seeks to draw you in. Pride is a cancer on the soul. But the power of sin is easily extinguished by humbly placing yourself before the Lord and taking away the temptation altogether. And so, church, I invite you to humble yourself before the Lord, to put yourself in the greatest position of strength you could ever imagine, knowing that you are important to God and matter to him. Cease your strivings in pride and put yourself in the hands of a God who loves you more than you know how to love yourself, and experience the power of coming home from the places you have fled to the farm you are always meant to inherit.